Hello and welcome to this new episode of Still Running. This project gathers insights from well-being professionals about what truly sustains people and performance under pressure. The goal is to bring together real-life voices, practical experience, and patterns that leaders and organizations need to understand now. I'm Andreea and this is Still Running. And I have a wonderful guest today, Seb Busz, which is my colleague in Stay Well Collective. And we have a lot of things in common. It was my pleasure to invite him to take part in this project. Welcome, Seb. And may I please ask you to introduce yourself to our audience today?
Yes, Andrea, first of all, thank you for this wonderful opportunity, as always. Full transparency, it was just, Andrea was like, do you want to have a call? And she's such a wonderful person. I was like, of course, we can have a chat and let's see where this conversation goes. So my name's Seb. I am the founder of Inceptivism, which is a philosophy that I created. And it's all about this idea of beginning again from within. And it's a lot of reflection, deep work, and asking questions that kind of go beyond the surface to really kind of get that truth out. And it's this idea that we've created through our stories and patterns and growing up through lives, where we start to make these subtle decisions which goes against us, which leans into this idea that I like to call where we effectively abandon ourselves. And it's taken this journey from self-abandonment, understanding, creating as much awareness around that as possible, making different choices. So we start leaning back into the world of self-trust. And the key bridge, and a lot of the conversations is always around permission and what that looks like. And it's that opportunity to re-give yourself the permission to go from abandonment to trusting yourself again and effectively living life as you were meant to. So yeah, lots of big work.
And it's so true. We end up abandoning ourselves because we are taught very young that appearances matter, that wrong and right are very definite, and you should do that and you shouldn't do that. So we have a set of rules we start with, and as we grow up, those rules no longer apply because those rules were valid for a while. They helped you, but as you grow and as you not only in age but also in experience and expertise, those rules no longer apply, but you still function following them. And that's where the self-abandonment comes into play. You believe uh, the outside world and you don't stop to wonder, what do I really want? What do I really need? Who am I really? And that's why it creates, the middle life crisis after 30-ish. A lot of people in their 30s begin to wonder, who am I? What am I doing here? What do I really want? Okay, what am I really getting paid for? Uh, Before, everybody was just swallowing whatever, and now it's like, no, I need a change. And it was very interesting because to participate in this project, I send you a series of questions that you filled in. And I read through them, and thank you for the replies. Really, really interesting. But I stopped at a couple, and I'm gonna go a little bit deeper, and I'm gonna quote you on some, because you said the moment everything changed was not dramatic. You were just sitting at home one evening, surrounded by everything you thought you wanted. What did that evening look like, and what was the exact question that stopped you? And can you expand a little bit more on everything you thought you wanted? I think that's common to a lot of us.
Yeah, nice. And I think it's a great question. So the first thing, naturally, when you pause now from a different space, you start to realize all the growth. And my initial thoughts, amazingly, is every time we go back to a memory, do we remember it, or are we just replaying it, we're recreating it with, different elements? But the core essence of that stays the same. And what I would say, it goes back to this idea of living life through other people's eyes, other people's decisions, and they're kind of directing your path. So, traditionally you go to school, you get the best grades possible so you can get to a better college, university so you can study what you want to study. And a lot of the time, I thought I had this all planned out and rooted. And then obviously, naturally, there's a few bumps in the road, life changes, and I'm very good at reframing and talking myself out of situations and then going full in and ahead in a different direction. So growing up with my parents, there was lots of support, but equally at the same time, there was no real kind of direction. It was very much you can live your life independently as long as you're, looking after yourself and not doing anything silly, then we support you, So it was nice, rounded. And I remember in particular for this, or where my mind was at in relation to the question, was COVID, which was a very, interesting time for a lot of people because you had that moment where you couldn't do anything else apart from stop and reflect, and at the time I had two kids. We were expecting our third child on the way. It was how do you find space, you know, in itself in the household. And it was at that point where every time you do this inner work, as I'm sure you're aware, you go deep. And one of my core values is always around honesty and how can I be honest with myself. So to answer the question honestly, I was at home. I just finished having an argument, which was a pattern. I was working at the airport at the time doing shift work, so my sleeping patterns were all over the place. So depending on how far into the weekly pattern, depending on my performance as a person and how I was responding. At the time, I was massively overweight. For me, I've been naturally very slim. To put it in perspective, I'm probably now waist 30, and at the time I was pushing waist 38, 40. So you can get kind of some visuals in terms of when I say overweight. The highlight of my week was drinking, watching football at the weekend, and I just found myself just waking up one day and going, surely there's got to be something more to this, right? Because on the outside, I was successful. I've had a very successful career. I've gone through a promotion pretty much every 18 months to 2 years. I'm now sitting in a job that a lot of people would really want in that world. And, I'm married. I've got a house, two cars, I've got three children or two children, one on the way. So from the outside perspective, and I'm very good at showing up, smiling, looking presentable, all these wonderful things. But the truth is, inside, everything is almost like collapsing. Yeah. I don't feel appreciated at work. I don't feel appreciated at home. I don't feel that anybody's listening to my ideas. I don't feel I'm challenging myself again. And it's this idea you get into this rut where I'm like, am I going to work to escape? Or am I going to work to just almost kind of how do I get through this disappointment where I'm not being heard? And sometimes when you keep asking the same question and keep getting rejected, or, I'm going to apply for this job and straight away you're rejected, or, you feel like you're stuck in this environment. And it's that idea when you actually stop, pause, and ask better questions. So start to create awareness around all of this. Allow yourself to breathe, to think about this. What had actually changed is, and I remember saying this to people as well through coaching conversations, in the airport environment, when people take that job, right, it's because of all the perks and the flexibility, right? So the job is effectively working for them, right? But what happens is because it's unsociable and so on and so forth, so all the perks somewhere in the wonderful realm of that world, they swap. So the job's no longer working for you, you're working for the job. And then you get to the point where you start doing overtime, so your salary increases and then, your yearly rate goes up to the point where you eventually get so disgruntled with the time and all the reasons why you wanted the job in the first place. But now you're trapped because you can't come out of it because your life revolves around this shift work. Your bills and all the things that you've bought now is based on the overtime that you're getting. So you've created this world for yourself, which was great. And then somehow it shifted to the opposite where you're like, I can't escape. I can't get out of this. And I don't know what to do. And that's where you start to live in that world where it feels like you've got no choices. It feels like you've got no next step. Yeah. And you're waiting, almost you're creating this idea subconsciously somewhere that you need a crisis or you need something desperately to go wrong to then give yourself the permission to say, you know what? I need to do something else.
And that's the point where a lot of people go for the change. Because let's face it, change is hard. even if it's for your own good, the first moments, the first months, sometimes years, are really uncomfortable because your external circumstances change, but you are changing on the inside as well. And when you do that, you lose friends, you start losing family sometimes. Uh, you tend you and I'm using the term losing uh, on purpose because it's not exactly using, you're letting go parts of yourself that no longer serve you, and those friends and those people and that environment was clearly in that category, no longer serving you. But as you said, trapped while on the outside everything looked fine, and you ask the universe for something to go wrong. Because what do? You drink, you watch TV, you fight a lot. A lot of people are in the same situation. And it kind of eats your relationship out in the house and at work because really there is no big difference. Your personal life affects your work like and vice versa. There is no not everybody can just cut themselves open and differentiate between the two. Um, how, when that moment came, and you did say something really amazing, you said that even that was difficult, I would do it all over again. And uh, you said the cost of that decision was financial security and your own identity, but you do it again without hesitation. What's different about how you see risk now versus then?
Yeah, so if I may, just before that, so I think it's really important to just highlight the fact that there's two things I always feel that it's escaping the world, right? So this idea of addiction or alcohol or arguments, it's basically leaving the environment that you're carrying it in because it's just an easy way out to the point where now I'm just forgetting about everything. And this is the quickest route to have that mental space clarity, even if it's just for a few moments, to the point where you drink too much, you pass out, you don't know what's happened. And you really just want to feel that, oh my gosh, how can I just escape? But the other reality of this is if when you're really being honest, is what am I doing in that circumstance? I'm not taking responsibility for anything that has to do with me. I'm just putting blame on everything else. I'm always having arguments. Well, that's because it's my wife's fault. I'm always having arguments. Yeah, because that's my marriage's crap. I'm not getting promoted at work because they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. I'm eating too much. Well, that's because I don't have time to cook. Do you see what I mean? Everything is always external. And the big thing, realization is that the only person's responsibility for me is myself. And the sooner you get to that world, the better, right? So going back to the answer to the question, it was I made that very difficult choice to leave that world, go into fear, go into uncertainty. However, the core alignment or that glimmer of hope or that light at the end of the tunnel was at least I'm being honest with myself. At least I'm choosing me and I'm approaching the situation from a better place. So, for example, when I started on this path, I mean, I referenced it very briefly to give you a perspective, but I focused on my health, right? So within 3 to 4 months, I started intermittent fasting. I was cautious of what I was eating. I tried to cut out sugar. I was taking a real interest in my diet. Yeah, naturally, I was getting fit. I was playing football a lot more to the point where very quickly I had to buy a new wardrobe again. But from a positive perspective, because none of my clothes fit because they were all too loose. Yeah. I was trying to get better routines in terms of sleep. So as I was showing up was a little different. Yeah. My thoughts were a bit more positive. Yeah. I'd actually had a good night's sleep, which in then turn changes the way that I approach my parenting. Yeah. Because obviously I'm not in that high stressful state. I'm a lot more calm. I leaned into breath work, to the cold, to practice, to regulate everything, to slow everything down, to really believe in this idea and experience the world of being present. Leaning more into the work, asking better questions, learning about myself, learning about the different modalities, learning about um, all the different ways in which not only I could help myself, but in turn help other people. So that was the choice that I've made, and that's the choice I still continue to make to this day. Yes, of course, every time we start something, there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be failures, we can reframe these things all the time. But it was really important at that moment in time, depending on how spiritual you are or depending what you want to believe in. But I genuinely feel that I am now a much better person because I've been through that experience and I would never change it for the world. Because look where it's led me
You know,
today, right?
yeah, I'm a big believer in responsibility. First step for me is self-awareness. I have a method called corporate deconditioning, and deconditioning is because this is what we are actually conditioned to do, to follow a set of rules, and we become those rules. We let those rules guide us instead of asking, who am I really and what do I really want? And the first step towards change is self awareness. Okay, I'm here. This is different from external. And the second pillar of my method is radical responsibility, owning your decision, your thoughts, your emotions, going deep into fear, into confusion, into anger, finding the root cause and say, you know what? Making a choice. I will follow that road or not, but taking full responsibility for you. And you mentioned something else that's really important, that's self-regulation. But that's a practice we forgot. And it's hard. It's hard. I first working on myself and working with numerous clients. That's the hardest way to come into balance with yourself, because it requires discipline, it requires practice, and there are a lot of setbacks. And you know what people do? Encounter a few setbacks, said, you know what? That doesn't work. This doesn't work for me. Coaching doesn't work. Therapy doesn't work. Whatever method does not work because they don't give themselves enough time to follow through. And when you've had patterns for decades, you cannot change them in 2 weeks. And it's even worse, I would say, again, loosely used, worse for organization who have a lot more inertia than an individual person do because there are, many individuals put together, creating a big block of resistance. And when change comes, all those resistances start popping up. So what kept you on track? And if people are like you, trapped,
Mhm.
feel trapped, what would be the first thing you would tell them to do?
It's a great question. So I feel the first thing always is to slow down and really understand and appreciate what it means to be present. There's lots of ideas out there, counting to five, doing some box breathing. It's really important that you make a decision from a clear mind and not respond, to that initial reaction. I found the cold therapy, so cold, ice baths, that type of thing, really helped in terms of control that for myself. And like you say, it's very important to try the different modalities because we're all unique, we're all individual, and sometimes things will work for us and sometimes not. Equally, I think what's really important as well is naturally it's that understanding and it's the permission to know that whatever you do, you're going to fail at it, and just understand that that's okay. Yeah. So, I could guide someone through some breath work. Do you think they're ever going to do that on their own? Not in a million years. Yeah. Oh, I did it wrong, or I don't have enough time, and it's the old patterns, it's the old voices coming in. So it's just understanding that you will fail, and that's okay. But it's catching it when you fail, and you go, okay. Slowing down again and trying to understand. And that for me is the big thing, not too dissimilar from yourself, right? Simple steps is a three-step process that I coach people through. And the first step is creating awareness from a point of how do we get that understanding? How do we ask a better question? So if we take the example of breath work, if I can do breath work when I'm guided with somebody in the presence of somebody, but I'm struggling on my own, so the invitation is to slow down and ask the questions. So is it the environment? Is it the time of day? What type of state are you in? Is it really that difficult? Are you trying to do breath work for half an hour? Is it unrealistic? Could you just try and do it for, 15 seconds? So it's just trying to understand yourself because you're the only person who can answer those questions. Yes. And it's just, how does that fit in to the point where we are slowing down? We're understanding that, yes, these things are going to be difficult, but the truth is, if we do nothing, we could probably predict what that road's going to look like. Yeah. And it's going to continue
I
the same
agree.
sort of patterns. Yeah. So it's pause, making that decision, and then knowing. And there's a certain element to a lot of these things. When you start to ask the better questions and do the self-reflection, you start to slowly build up that self-trust, that self-worth, that self-knowing, and say, if, and there's lots of suggestions in this, but one of my favorite ones is this idea of, being quite spiritual is, and this is the idea, the suggestion is that we chose this life. We chose the lessons that we are on this path to learn, to overcome. So it's about pausing and saying, okay, so if I chose this life, did I really choose to be doing this, to living in this, dark depths and going through struggle after struggle after struggle? Or am I not being present enough to realize that this is the challenge that I'm here to overcome? And once I overcome this, once I step into the fear, once I come to the other side, it's exciting because we've got all that hope, all that optimism, all that wonderful world of abundance. And what does that actually look like?
I noticed you reframing the question while you were asking it,
Yes.
because the answer is, did I choose this experience? And a lot of the time, the answer is yes. And you have to stay with that yes. And it's really uncomfortable. Yes, I chose to be here in this shitty situation, to tell it right. And this is following my choices. But it's so easy to blame somebody else. My parents, because they raised me the way they did, the school teachers, because they taught me the way they did, that job, that company, because, they have stupid rules and I have to follow them. It's so much easier to let it go externally and not take responsibility for anything. Corporations have this joke that there is a blame game. Different departments don't take responsibility for anything others do, so they ping pong emails, tasks, projects from one to another, and customers are left waiting. And it's a pattern, and it's easy because, you know what, it doesn't concern me, it's not on me, I don't have to do anything about it, because change does mean work, and does mean staying with the uncomfortable feelings and sensations. And sometimes there are physical sensations that are really uncomfortable. Fear, anger, confusion is a physical sensation, and you really want to get out of it, to escape, to do anything not to feel. And you have that patterns for decades. What is really interesting for me is, you said you have a client who came to you about self-confidence, and in the end, the problem was self-trust. Did it change for him, and what did you do together to get him to recognize that?
Yeah, so I think again, it's really important. Sometimes it's just a lot of the reflection as you do as a coach is setting up the expectation that I believe that all the answers that you ever need are within you. They don't come from me. So it's about, how do we really hold the space, making sure that we're present and listening to the answers that are coming out. And then the gift or the intuition that I have is, I'm really hearing the words. I'm hearing, almost when people say it, you can hear and you go, oh, let's go back a step. Let's dig a little bit deeper there. Because there was a bit of judgment, or there was a bit of blame, or there was that point where they weren't taking responsibility for something. So the invitation is, how do we explore that? How do we first of all create awareness around that, be present in that moment to the point where you have just dismissed it, subconsciously just comes out, you're not even aware. How do we create the awareness, pause, and explore that? Ask better questions so you get understanding. And ultimately, every time you ask a question, you're going to get a different answer. So naturally, the idea is, if we emphasize the question and improve the question, more depth, different layer, we're just unraveling the answers, rolling off in terms of the experience. Yeah. So surface level, because sometimes if you've got a challenge, for example, confidence, right? So this idea of confidence, there's lots of ways and lots of different theories out there, but it's this, if I said confidence was a skill and it's just something that you do as opposed to a gift that you have. Okay, so for example, I'd be confident to hold a space and ask people questions and challenge them in a particular area. However, if you gave me a subject or said to me, Seb, can you recite all of this in Romanian? I'm not confident because I don't have a clue where to begin or what if that even sounds like. Where do I even start? So immediately my emotion is going, well, I'm going into fear, I'm going into panic. Yeah. So the real level in terms of the example that we're saying there is that if I'm telling myself that I don't have confidence, the surface underneath that is actually I'm choosing that I don't trust myself in whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve. So let's use an analogy of doing a talk. If I'm going out into an audience and I'm talking out a particular subject and I'm saying I don't want to do it because I haven't got the confidence, the reality is that you don't trust yourself to deliver that information. And this is what came apparent. So it's just, like I say, just to repeat, but slow down, ask some better questions, and really understand where this feeling is coming from and what does it actually look like. Because there's lots of labels, lots of words out there that the world uses which don't necessarily fit or aren't necessarily relevant to you. And it's this idea that we trust ourselves. Yeah. If you think about the different environments in your life, generally speaking, it's when you're at home and you feel safe, surrounded by your loved ones, that you can say and do the most stupid things and you don't care, right? Because you don't feel judged. You just feel loved in that environment. However, if you're now in an office space and you don't really know everybody, and then you start singing to the radio a bit too loudly, and everyone's like, oh, what's going on over there? There's a little bit of judgment. There's a little bit of fear. There's a little bit, oh my God, I can't believe I've done that, right? So it depends on how much trust you have in yourself as a character to say, this is who I am. And if you don't like my singing, tough. Yeah. Or do I choose to quietly apologize, not sing, not be myself? And in turn, what am I doing? I'm now learning to abandon myself from not a huge dramatic instance, but very small, subtle. And now I'm just replaying that in my mind that no, 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 we have to be safe. We have to feel safe because this is what it always goes back to, that core belief of how do I survive? I need to be safe. And if I don't sing, no one judges me. No one talks to me. Yeah. But in time, inside, sorry, you are losing who you are at your core essence.
And you will feel unsafe. A lot of things revolve around this concept of safety that we really don't discuss. We create these stories, these scenarios, catastrophes sometimes in our heads, and we predict the worst results that will never come to pass, precisely to control the situation and to create safety, which is an illusion, but it does help. And also, organizations don't change anything until something breaks. Individuals do as well. So we are, like you said, pray for something to go wrong. So I have an excuse to do something else because change is hard. And imagine a manager. You had a manager like this in this position coming to you and not trusting themselves to lead the team, to create a safe space for the team. It's not like, you know, the team members don't know what to do, but they're not safe enough to act, to speak up, to create. And you said something very interesting that um, the team, the earliest signs of disengagement in a team is not complaints. It's people stop bringing new ideas and just do the minimum. So why do leaders walk past that signal for so long? Can I have your opinion on that?
Yeah, nice. So, I mean, let's just play out the scenario in terms of the context of the answer. So, you've got a room full of, let's say you manage a team of 10. Your first day in the job, everyone's bringing wonderful ideas. You think, wow, what a great bunch of people, right? A few weeks go by, another team meeting, everybody's still fully engaged. Another month goes by, and all of a sudden, one in particular, there's no real engagement. So what's going on here? Then you may reach out, is everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine, no problem. Yeah. Another week, another meeting, all of a sudden there's just less engagement, right? And it's this point that somewhere along that line, they've lost confidence in themselves or that trust to say, I can't speak up because I'm not being listened to, or you're not taking on board my ideas, or I'm not feel valued as a team member. Or equally, something, could be going wrong in their personal life and you just don't have that relationship and it's affecting the way that they work. So now they go back into the default mode and you say, you know what, I've lost interest. My mind is elsewhere. What do I need to do at the absolute minimum to get myself through the day? And it's just that I've had that experience before, right? Where you bring somebody in. I mean, one of the big things I say now, right? I pride myself on is every time I had a one-to-one with a team member, the one rule that I had was I would never talk about work, right? It sounds really simple, right? But I just wanted to know about them. I wanted to make sure that they were okay. I wanted to make sure that they're chasing their goals, their family well, their health. Are you okay? Is there any way in which I can help you? Because I had this old-fashioned idea, and this idea was from very early in my managerial career of if I had the power to influence your life outside of work, be it change a shift, give you a day off, give you a holiday, whatever it is, help you, right? Then you're going to bring that wonderful positive experience and happy energy into work. So then it's just going to make my life easier. So if I'm looking out for your well-being, what am I going to get in return? I'm going to get happy staff, happy environment, and equally, because I've helped you out, you're more likely to say, "Ah, Seb, you know what? I can do that for you, no problem." Yeah, and we start to work together from an aspect of yes, there is the conversations for work and KPIs and all that type of stuff. But if we can get that personal relationship where we are on the same page, and you know that I can help you, and we can have that transparent, honest conversation, that this is going to really help you in your private life to be happy and achieve what you need to, then how do I support that and the person that you are to achieve everything that you need to achieve in that moment? Then you're gonna be an invaluable member of my team. And that's always how I would manage people. Manage them for who they are. And if there is a dip in performance or work, going back to the question, it's I need to now explore that even more. Because everybody's got ideas, everybody's got uh, I keep going back to the word ideas, yeah, but they've got inspiration, they've got imagination, they want to progress or they want to do things in a certain way. And it's just having those honest conversations.
And that's a cultural thing. So creating a culture of safety and trust and well-being, not just simply programs here and there, workshops here and there that do nothing in the bigger picture. Because we are whole people. So again, as I've said before, and I will repeat over and over, we cannot exactly detach from my personal life. So if you have a bad day in your personal life, you will bring a bad attitude at work. Of course, you kind of detach yourself and you say, I'm fine, even if you're not. It's a lie, and your body recognizes it. Your nervous system is recognizing it. And in again, days and weeks and months, it's a kind of erosion that happens on the inside and leads you to a disease, which sometimes is a physical disease, and then people get sick, take days off. There is backlog. The people who are present at work need to work double or triple to uh, uh, take over the activities of the people who are not there for various reasons. It creates frustration, resentment. They don't talk about it because it is what it is, and we are doing the best we can. We do more with less. I hear that a lot. Um, and it's not safe. So the whole culture is not well-being anymore. It's a machine supported by numbers, and nobody cares. And if nobody cares, why should I care? And it's worse for managers because they have pressures from below their team. They have to take care of their team, and from above because they have directives. They need to justify. They need to sell to their teams. So it's a lot of pressure. What would be a way to address that?
In terms from both aspects. So I would say always with this, my approach is the approach not too dissimilar from my coaching practice, right? It's honest conversations. And it's that understanding that we are taught or raised to not question authority. Okay. And how much of that do we not realize subconsciously that we're taking into the workplace day after day? We want to progress. We want to get to the next level. So we create this habit of, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Even if you disagree. Challenging your boss is a big no-no in a lot of people's eyes. Yes. And I've had it in the past where a manager said to me, can you go and have this conversation with somebody? I didn't even know what it was about. I didn't even understand the reasoning. Yeah. So then I went, spoke to them, guilty as charged, came back to my boss a couple of weeks later. She approached me and said, you didn't even have that conversation. I said, yes, I did. She's like, well, you didn't do what you didn't do what I told you to do. And I went, listen, I had the conversation and then I chose to do something else. If you don't like the response, then you're very welcome to have the conversation yourself. Yeah. And it's about having those subtle moments where you get these moments in life and went, well, hang on a second, I need to stand up for myself. I'm not just a yes person. I'm a personality. I've got my own way of doing things, my own thought process. And equally, I'm a manager. So you've given me a task to manage the situation, and I have. If you don't like that, we can have that conversation. But for you to then stand there and tell me off because I didn't do what you said, I'm like, ooh, this is a very different area, right? So for me, it's being consistent with yourself, being honest with yourself, and not being afraid to challenge naturally in a professional environment, in a professional space. And within reason, you being you and your character and who you choose to show up, your identity, you by default are creating those expectations. Yeah. And it's just how to be fair and transparent from both sides, from managing staff to listening to their troubles and their understanding the fact that, yes, there is the business and how do we make this work together to where I can support you and you can support me, and equally from the management above. And it's managing expectations. So if they say to you, here's a deadline, you say, listen, I can achieve that. However, not the Friday that you want it to be achieved. However, if you want it done properly, I'll be able to achieve it at a later date because I've got this project, this project, this project. Yeah. Or if that is a priority, just so that you know, these are going to pause and I'm going to put my full focus into that. And it's one of the big things I've learned over the last 18 months, which goes into this slightly, is you can negotiate everything in life. Yes. And it's not always yes and no. Yeah. It's how does this work and how can you help me or how can I help you? How do we come together, work together as in a collaboration where we get the end result? And it doesn't always default to yes, I'll do that. And I'll work more hours and I'll work my weekends and I'll get up early and I won't sleep just to hit a deadline for my boss to turn around and say, thanks very much. That I didn't like that, but here's another one. Can you correct it? Then you go back, correct it all, and then they say, here, you've done so well, here's another 4 projects. Because you've now set up an expectation that you're going to deliver that to the required level in the shortest amount of time. And now you've got a reputation of just saying yes. All right, yes, you're delivering, but what are you doing to yourself, right? You're abandoning yourself. You're leaning into, as it says on the screen there, right? You're leaning into this world of burnout where I've got nothing left. There's no energy. How do I feel the energy? Sugar drinks, energy drinks, coffee, you name it, medication, it spirals. You take all that frustration and stress out on your loved ones and your friends and family because they don't understand. They're not in the environment. They don't know the world. They don't know how it works. And if I just get this next project, I'm going to get the next job and then it will go to normal. Then I can delegate the work. And you see how the patterns and the spirals, it just continues.
I'm very familiar with that, and
Yeah.
I've done that. This is how I reached the
Yeah.
burnout, and that almost killed me because I was so focused on proving myself and get it validated by others that I took on extra and extra and extra work. So I worked for 3 to 5 people. They replaced me with 3 to 5 people in all the jobs I left, almost all the jobs I left, just because I took on more work and I never said no to anything new. And I like the challenge. It's the type of personality and of energy I have. I thrive with difficult situations. So people took advantage of that, and I allow them to take advantage of that because it helped me get the validation I didn't even know I needed because somebody really early on installed that program that I needed is the external validation to feel worthy, to deserve, to receive, and permissions. I never gave my permission to feel or to say no and to feel how it actually, in the body to negotiate because, authority is not negotiable. This is from our parents.
Mm.
So I see the value in coaching managers, especially to see that because a lot of times while you're in the issue, you're in the problem, you don't see all the things you said and all the things we see with our clients when they start telling what's happening in their lives, and you go, ah, you're using that word, so that word might mean something, or you're judging that. Why are you judging that? But they don't see it. They need the mirroring that coaching and other different modalities bring that makes them better managers and better professionals and better people in the end. It's not like we have the answers, but by mirroring them and by bringing an outside perspective, they can figure out for themselves, ah, I can reframe that. Uh, ah, there is another way of looking at this. And I love the questions you're asking because, uh, again, I'm quoting is you said there are two questions you keep coming back to. What are you pretending not to know? And is it true? Can you take one of us through them live right now?
Nice. So, I mean, the only way we'd do is to, to reflect on a particular challenge in your life right now. And what's the question that it comes to mind?
Well, let's see. I have a couple of clients, and it's very interesting. I do inner child work with them,
Mhm.
and they are very different. And one of them is struggling because they don't want to let go of they are while they're talking, I can see it's difficult for them to release the image they already have of themselves.
Mhm.
The other one is really self-aware, uh, really good, but again, they're too spiritual. And uh, my recommendation for both of them is to sit in the body, to slow down, to breathe, to sense. And it's very, very difficult for them. So my conundrum right now is how do I create a safer space and how do I reframe for them differently because they are mirroring differently enough so they see this pattern they have, both of them. One is too much spiritual, so it goes very high, so it leaves the body, and
Mhm.
the other one decides to keep themselves
Mhm.
very small, because taking responsibility is so hard, and they have to grow up,
Mhm.
and growing up comes with challenges. So they both of them are really interested in the work. They come to the sessions, they are involved, but in reality, they are escaping in different areas.
Yeah, very nice, right? So out of that, if we just take one scenario, let's say the lady who is spiritual, higher level. So what would you say if you were saying it to her? Would you say in terms of what is it that she is pretending that she doesn't already know?
She knows everything. That's the issue. She knows so much. She's not willing to entertain other perspectives.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the idea. So the train of thought is this woman is going to the higher space. She knows everything, right? So my first question is that true?
Probably not. Of course not.
Of course not, right? But then the interesting thing there for that example is that if we go back to the first question, is this idea that if she's got this belief and idea that she knows everything, we are effectively almost challenging the belief to give her the idea and the awareness that we're basically saying to her, you don't know everything. And how do we control that space? How do we control that conversation, that awareness, right? Until she realizes that actually, you know, she's invited to take on a different suggestion, a different space. Yeah. And it's
And
the
that's big. Yeah,
exactly
that's
right.
a challenge because you know people who are know-it-alls, and I've met a lot of managers. I use the therapy examples because I don't want to offend everybody,
Correct.
but you know a lot of managers who are all knowledgeable and you cannot argue with them. So they know everything. So how do you tell them, and that goes for a lot of our audience, how do you tell them, no, you don't know everything. You should look at another perspective because it might help you go into this direction.
Of course, right? And I would say it's a play with the language because it's not about every time when we're creating awareness, it's the idea that we remove judgment, we reduce right and wrong, and we're just looking this from a different perspective. So then I would just offer them, and sometimes what works here, some really good references are always if you give the invitation where they are, let's say they've got children, and you say, right, you're now in my shoes, we're now looking together, and this is your child that's going through this experience. How would you invite them to think about this from a different perspective? Yeah. Sometimes that works really well because you're taking yourself out and you're reflecting from a different space. Yeah. It's not too dissimilar when I say to people about going for interviews, right? Put yourself on the other side of the table. If you're asking the questions, what do you want to hear? Yeah, as opposed to what do I say? Yeah, and it's just sometimes it's just how do we tell that story or that situation where we can offer a different suggestion where we're basically leading their thoughts to somewhere else. And then, as you know, all the work is internal, so they have all the answers, but we're just inviting them to look at it, to take a step down, to say, you know what? But like you said, equally, if she wants to live in this world, then the deeper question is what she's trying to escape, what she's afraid of letting go of. And depending on how that conversation, this is where you know, or that person definitely knows, yeah, that they're pretending not to know the answer. Of course, you know the answer. Everybody knows the answer. It's just we're choosing to avoid it and we're trying to create the story and tell ourselves that we know everything and we need to stay here and this is the only way and da 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 da. You're like, whoa. You know, it's almost like you need to give her the invitation to say, here's a pin and this wonderful balloon that you've done. What happens when it goes bang? Because one day this is what's going to happen, right?
I agree. And the look on their faces when they catch themselves, because it's a moment, it's an aha moment. I actually catch myself saying something not true. And I know it's not true. And I've been telling myself that for years and it doesn't work. Why do I keep doing it?
And that's the question, right? So if it's serving you so well, then why are we in this conversation? Why are you escaping to this space? Because maybe it is serving you sometimes. However, maybe we can reframe that. Maybe we can approach this from a different perspective. Yeah. And it's like always, I think the gold question here is always the second one, right? Is every time you play over this thoughts over your head and do I make this decision or this, that, and the other, or you making assumptions because naturally we judge ourselves or judge other people, is it true? And if you just
Yeah.
strip it back to the core essence, is it true that that you need to escape? No. Is it true that you're not lovable? No. Is it true that you're not good enough? No. Is it true you were put on this earth to just live in the clouds? No. What do you mean?
Yeah, and it's hard, and that, I think that's the value of reflection, and that's the value of hindsight, and that's the value of mirroring and having coaching sessions, different modalities, because you it doesn't work when you're saying to yourself over and over. You can pretend not to know, but when you're faced with another person who doesn't buy it, you need to stop lying at a certain point, or it doesn't work, and you see it very clearly, it doesn't work. Um,
Yeah. And the other caveat I would say to that, and this is kind of again just following intuition, is this idea is also sometimes you will come across a client in a situation where they're not ready. And that's equally okay. And that's equally sometimes where you say, this is as far as we go. Because our job naturally as
Absolutely.
facilitators, modalities, coaches is it's not necessarily we can't force them to look from a different perspective. We're just trying to create that safe space, that awareness so they can get to that solution. However, at the same time, if they want to sit there for a little bit longer, then there's a fantastic opportunity to say, you know what? Maybe you can sit there, think about this, and we'll have a conversation, maybe not next week, maybe in a few months' time.
Absolutely, and sometimes change is not immediate. You realize you had a conversation or a series of sessions, and you 6 months later, you don't recognize yourself making a decision. Say, oh, well, that's the change that those conversations 6 months ago brought in me, and right now it's integrated enough so I can see the difference when I make a different kind of decisions, when I set a different type of boundaries. So sometimes it's hard to tell in the moment that something changed, something shifted, and that's why also I know as well as you, we invite patience and self-reflection
Yes.
and again slowing down and self-regulating because the nervous system is really really slow and the embodiment is something really really slow,
Mhm.
and we forgot this connection with our nervous system, with our bodies. So it's so much easier to go on the outside like we discussed than to go inside and keep pretending we don't know.
Exactly.
Um, you gave, so I hope this little exercise we had is very useful for the audience, and I invite you all to ask yourself, what do I pretend I don't know? Is it true? To see how it works. Um, I love journaling. That's why I published Still Here, which is a journal, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Is a journal about you, basically about asking different questions of yourself and sitting with yourself. If you want to know more, it's available on Amazon. But you gave in the replies you gave a wonderful tip that before a meeting, people should watch a funny video. Where does that come from?
Nice. So yeah, so it's this idea of when we're leaning into the worlds of energies, right? So if you walk into a room and the room is laughing, obviously naturally it's that wonderful warm sensation. You walk in, you're intrigued, and you're like, wow, I feel good already. I don't even know why they're laughing. It's that little bit of intrigue, right? But it's also raising that vibration, raising that energy within yourself. You're smiling, you're happy, you're bringing that wonderful emotion into the conversation. So I often to say to people before you go into a big meeting, like you said, is watch something funny, listen to some inspiration, listen to your favorite music, dance, do movements, get yourself this, everything is up. Because the alternative is, right, what do I need to remember to say? Oh my gosh, how am I going to answer this? Oh, I need to remember this line. And oh my gosh, what if they say this? And, it's very different from that approach, that kind of scarcity mindset, kind of like, oh, I'm tense, my body's tense, everything is just, it's not in flow, it's not in alignment. And sometimes you just get the natural where you're not even aware of setting the intention of how you're going to be going into a meeting, and you just show up however, depending on how your day went. So if you're having a good day, the meeting's going to be fine. If you're having a bad day, someone might say something and you might react differently. Whereas if we can intentionally set that and go, right, this is an important meeting, I need to show up as, the best version of me today. How do I set my intention? How do I get my energy to that wonderful good place? Watch something funny. Yeah. I literally did it the other day. I was having a bit of a bad day, as you do, and I'm going through social media. I come across this comedian, and literally within 2 minutes, I'm crying with laughter. My kids are all looking at me like, "What's happened to you?" And I'm like, "I don't care because now I'm joyful, and it's this wonderful emotion, and it's also a wonderful release of all that tension, that stress, that fear. Get rid of it. Go back into yourself, that wonderful, joyous person that you are, and show that energy, and just enjoy the experience."
That's a decision, changing your state because and it is possible. Like you said, you listen to something funny, you laugh. I've noticed people laugh less these days. There is a endless litany of complaints. It is too hot, too cold. The weather is responsible. The boss, the company, the parents, the children. So it's so easy to complain, but you don't realize that by complaining, you create bad energy. And you swallow, you breathe that bad energy, you create it, and it's all over. So, of course, you don't feel good. We are at the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for participating. I really value your experience, your expertise, and your advice. One last word before we close. If I were a CEO right now, so coming to you for advice for my team, for my organization, what would you say to me? And I know you have a concept, uh, a word you use a lot is self-trust. Uh, what would be your advice to me? What you do just say?
Linking into the last answer, as a CEO, I would say give your team permission to laugh. Give your team permission to enjoy themselves. Give them permission, the freedom to speak their mind and create that safe environment where we're not living into the world of judgment. We're not living in the world of to do. We are embracing a culture of where we're all people. We're treating people as people and we're learning as much about them as possible to the point where we can really create great relationships, great friendships. And so it would be that give them the permission to be themselves.
Thank you very much, Seb. Thank you. I hope our audience enjoys as much as I do this conversation. Talk to you soon. This is still running. Andreea Păușan. See you next time. Have a great evening.
Yes. Thank you so much.